An economic analysis of the 8-hour workday. So to understand the history, or why we have an 8-hour workday, we need to go into the history of the 8-hour workday. We actually need to go a bit back, right around the time, a little bit before the Industrial Revolution began, to fully understand it. So before the Industrial Revolution began and labor started moving into the factories and whatnot, most labor for goods was produced in a home setting, I want to say. You usually had, like you say, the master, I don't know the proper terminology, but they had the master and the apprentice, and maybe a group of other apprentices, trainees and whatnot, family members, who would all work and produce a good. So let's say they produced cotton, which would be used to make cotton clothing. So it would be a small group of individuals doing this, and then they would market it out to people. And this would be their main source of income. It wasn't so much money. I mean, money did exist at the time, but it was more so selling the cotton, the product of cotton, for other goods. So I would make cotton and you would give me livestock, chickens, so I can eat. And this was done on a small scale level, right? And because human labor was limited due to machinery, there's only so much you could work. So, if you had to make cotton is very labor intensive, and that's why that's why you can say the slave rebellion happened in the States, because the South was losing all this labor because machinery wasn't so introduced at the time in the South. And the same could be said elsewhere. So in the UK or wherever else, you needed a ton of heads to get the cotton, to make the cotton into a usable fabric. So with a limited number of individuals, you couldn't really get much done. So you were limited to how many hours you had to work. So I would say they were working less than 8 hours. They were definitely working less than 8 hours. I would venture to say 4 hours a day would be spent on that specific thing, and then the rest would be reading the Bible. Okay, so that's how it was before the Industrial Revolution. So with the introduction of the Industrial Revolution, you began to have more of the, I guess you could say, jobs moving into a factory setting. So what happens is that it's no longer in a family housing setting, a common setting, and so you lose that familiarity. And what happens is that one of the issues that happens is that labor loses its skill set, because with factories comes machinery. So to reduce production costs, beforehand the apprentice would learn everything from start to finish, from picking the cotton to weaving it to selling it, whatever. The apprentice would learn all that. So with the factories, what the factory owners would do to reduce cost is that they would have one person specialize in one thing. So you would have, maybe cotton's not the best example, but work with me. You would have one person pick the cotton, and that would be their sole purpose, to pick the cotton. Then you had one person who would specifically just weave it and just and that's all they would do. So that's one issue that already arises, a loss of skill set. And yes, they do specialize, and there's arguments for and against specializing in it, but overall it created more harm than good. So with the rise of factories you also have more money being put into one individual rather than a group. Because when you had a number of masters and whatnot working in, let's say, Manchester, you know, at the time you can't really market it to other areas just due to lack of means of getting there. You can go horse, like, yeah, you can. Chances are, what is the chances of someone of a master in Manchester competing with someone in Glasgow? You know, people would much rather prefer to buy their cotton from Glasgow than from Manchester. Simple as that. So, but with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, you know, came the existence of trains and other means of transportation, steam engine, whatnot. So it became a lot easier. And so the transfer of wealth became more and more into the hands of certain individuals. So the loss of labor power. No, not labor power. What would be the proper term? I guess you could say the lack of owning your means of production. Yes, that'd be the right term. Lack of the people owning their means of production came less and less. So you have these people who have control, more and more control over a larger set of individuals. And because of that, when you have one person who has power over many, they can dictate what they want. So this goes into the 8-hour workday. Now back then they were not working 8-hour workday, they were working 12, 14, 16-hour days. Basically wake up, go there, go home, sleep. That's basically how it worked. The reasoning behind that was because they were competing, and it was not a now Manchester and Glasgow were competing with each other because it was easy to distribute the cotton all over the United Kingdom and even internationally, you could argue. So to meet the growing demand and to crush competition, people would be worked endlessly. So you could say that the factories never stopped running. They were working 24/7. They would have night laborers, they would have day laborers. Obviously, that creates problems. Working 16-hour days is not good for your health. It's not good for your education and whatnot. I mean, there were no labor laws back then, so children could be worked for long periods of time with no issue whatsoever. Just a number of things. Education was non-existent back then for many individuals, so they were worked to death, basically, you could say. Now, another issue that came up was machinery. Obviously, machinery makes a person's job easier. So with the invention of cotton mills, you could say, you know, what was not possible back then was now possible with 500. You would need 500 people beforehand to get it done. You now only need 100. So 500 minus 400, that's 400 people that have lost their jobs. So now it becomes more competitive. So people are willing to work for less money and for longer hours, because if you don't work, you starve. Which is why the welfare state now exists in the UK. But that's another story. So, with the rise of machinery, became more problems. And even though there were some modest attempts to keep machinery back from its use, such as the ribbon loom. Funny, crazy story about that. Apparently, the creator of the ribbon loom was killed because they were worried that a lot of people would lose their jobs and there'd be riots, which I can understand, makes perfect sense. So, but we need to get back. We're gonna get back into that machinery. Machinery makes the job easier for people, and you see that even today, even to this day. What you needed in the 1940s, you needed a number of individuals to write letters and whatnot. Now one person can write a letter and just send out to mass individuals with the invention of email. But anyway, going back to 8-hour workday, the 8-hour workday was not done because of machinery, because even though machinery was put in place, there was still a use for them. The factory's owners still had use for them, so yes, less people are working, but those 100 people are still working a 16-hour workday. And that's done just to reduce costs, because it's cheaper to keep one employee than to keep 10. It's just basic math. But the 8-hour workday ended up becoming fact, thanks to basically due to class warfare and labor. Basically, labor rights came into play. Workers protested, rioting in the streets. In the United States, in Chicago, I mean, bombs were set off at police officers. I mean, it was very violent. But due to their efforts, the 8-hour workday was put into place, and that's why we have labor laws today. But the issue is that the 8-hour workday has been put into place since basically the end of the Industrial Revolution. It's been the norm, and we're growing to see that this is not really feasible in our society anymore. With the introduction of machinery, skill sets become less and less needed. So, for example, let's think of a modern day example. Making websites. Let's say back in 1995 or whatever, you would need an individual who would do that, because the skill set wasn't there. So that person would do it. You would hire that individual, and each prospective business would hire the individual. Nowadays, you have such things as content management systems like WordPress, Nation Builder, or whatnot. Now that same skill set has basically no longer have any use. So yes, it's still a valuable tool to have, but why is someone going to hire someone who has a skill set when they could just do it because someone somewhere else created a free system like WordPress that makes it very simple? So again, the loss of skill set is to be found, just like back then. Another issue is the fact that with the introduction of machinery, there is no longer a need for people working 8 hours. So, let's go with our website example. Thanks to WordPress and whatnot, you could say make a website in, if you're really good at it, I'd say 6 hours. You do that. So what do you do for the remaining 2 hours? You don't do anything. So the existence of the whole point of, and I should have mentioned this earlier, is that the factories and businesses in general, they're interested in surplus labor. So let's say a cell phone company sells us a certain cell phone, right, and makes these cell phones. All right, the company needs to sell a certain amount of cell phones to equal the cost of making it. So let's say making the cell phone costs $50. Let's make 500 cell phones cost $50. So the businesses, everything that they make afterwards and they sell is all that they're interested in. That's what surplus labor is. Now, that can still apply to places like Bangladesh or whatever, because they're making our cell phones. But in the United States, you don't really have that so much these days. What you have, the largest type of employment, the mass majority of people have, of Americans have, is a consumer market, so self-serving market. So retail, plumbing, whatnot, things that don't actually produce anything. And the reason the whole 8-hour workday was created was not for jobs like these, but for jobs like the jobs over in Bangladesh. So there is really no surplus labor. A plumber can only come and fix your house for, it only takes him 2 hours to fix your plumbing job. Now, granted, that plumbers may work on a salary, but some plumbers may work by the hour. Or, if you want a better example, retail. Retail doesn't actually produce anything of value, they just merely sell. So there is no surplus labor to be made. So the businesses don't actually make any profit whether or not Mike over at Old Navy works that extra hour, because there is no excess labor to be produced. He is not a direct proponent of the money being made. What makes the money is the people coming in, and that's why sales is huge. So you're faced with an issue in the United States, at least, and I guess in many mature economies, is that the 8-hour workday actually loses money for businesses. So you have an issue here, because due to laws in the United States and everything, you work 8 hours a day, you're considered full-time, versus you work part-time, but that comes with costs. Part-time, if you were to lose your job, you don't get the same benefits, unemployment benefits. You can't get, well, with Obamacare that might change, but you can't get health benefits. And basically, at the end of the day, a person cannot survive working part-time 4 hours a day. They need that 8 hours work wage because of how the system's set up. Despite this becoming a loss for the businesses. So this creates a big issue. So what do most businesses do? They go abroad. And obviously self-serving businesses like plumbing, they can't go abroad because you can't really fix a toilet if you're over in Bangladesh, Myanmar or wherever. So what happens? That's the issue. Businesses cannot prosper under the certain system, so they go abroad. Workers do not have jobs, so this creates a hole, and the hole is not being fixed. So the only real solution to this problem that I can think of is to change the labor laws so that working less hours is considered full-time, and to increase the wages so the equivalent of working 8 hours a day is the same as working full 4 hours a day. Because you have to really think about this. Either way, businesses are losing out, because how many hours can a plumber work? He can't. He's working those 2 hours, but he's getting paid another 6. It's a lose-lose situation. Well, it's not really a lose situation for the plumber, but it is a lose situation for the business. And then for businesses that can go abroad, they do so because they don't have such labor laws over in Southeast Asia. The question is whether or not society can really accept the less hours working. because the 8-hour workday is so engraved in our society and in the business mindset. So that's all I really have to say about that. I really hope you guys see why the 8-hour day was important and is no longer needed in a post-industrial economy, because the 8-hour workday simply does not work in the United States. It's just not feasible for businesses. It's not feasible for individuals who are sitting around at their job with nothing to do and get scolded by their bosses for having nothing to do when there is nothing to do, when they could use their free time for valuable skill sets for their leisure. That's it. Thanks.